Welcome into the latest edition of the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. I'm Ryan Schumpert, and we have a very special edition of the podcast today as we bring in Sports Illustrated's college basketball and NBA draft expert, Kevin Sweeney. Kevin, in my opinion, one of the very best on the national level covering the sport. And I guess to give you some credibility to the folks that don't know you before we start, you were one of the very first people on the Dalton Connect hype train last year. You were high on it before the season. I think if my memory is correct, you were at the Wisconsin game, and we're singing his praises after that one. So you were one of the first people on the Dalton Connect bandwagon. For anyone who doesn't know, Kevin. So appreciate you joining the pod, man.
Yeah, I'm glad that provides me some credibility. Appreciate you having me.
We'll go ahead and dive right into it. Going to talk a little bit about this Tennessee team and then a little bit on the SEC as a whole here. And just to start, Tennessee pretty consensus where they stand in the preseason. Number 12 in the AP and coaches poll, number 12 on the Evan Maikawa, 13 on Ken Palm, and then kind of the one a little bit off, a little bit different. Bart Torvik has him number 6. So just to start, Kevin, this Tennessee team, what do you have the most confidence in them? What are you the most excited about with them right now? And kind of what are your worries for them going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the confidence stems from point guard play and coaching, right? I mean, Rick Barnes has been a top 15 Ken Palm team, has coached top 15 Ken Palm teams in 5 of the last 7 years. So if you don't have them in the top 15 nationally, like I need an explanation why. And I certainly don't have that when you have Sky Ziegler running the show, right? Like you have an experienced point guard who was one of the best players in the country down the stretch last year. Um, like you have that combination, you start with a very, very high floor. And then from there, it's all right, like what can we do beyond that to level up? And, I think they did a good job, obviously in the portal with Chaz. Chaz gives them some upside. I think naturally the comparisons will be to Dalton, and it won't be fair to him, quite frankly, because no one's going to be Dalton Connect. There will, like, the number of guys that go from um, Northern Colorado or North Florida or whatever into SEC Player of the Year or one of those players in the country. Like that's just not going to happen. But he has the same ability to take over certain games because of his shot making ability. And I know there've been some early optimism based on some practice and secret scrimmages and whatnot that he can step into a pretty huge role. I think adding Akpara I think will help them on the inside, especially after everything that went down this spring in the front court. But look, I think they have the personnel to really play a fun modern style of basketball, which I know maybe sounds odd talking about a Rick Barnes team. So much criticism over the years. It's defense, defense, defense. Like, no, this team's going to fly up and down the floor. They can really, really shoot the basketball. And they have elite point guard play and a lob threat at the rim. That's a pretty good combination to go be dynamic offensively. And I think this group has the upside to be just that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with just the floor being super high with what they have back. And I think there's a level with the defense that you're going to feel some things missed with Josiah and with Santi gone and so many fix-it plays that those guys made. But when you talk about Sky Ziegler at the point, Jemai Meshack on the wing, and Felix Akpara down low, I'd be hard-pressed to not think those are top 5 defenders at their respective position in the entire country. So that sets the floor really low. And then a lot of it will be about the transfers. And you mentioned Chaz Lanier. He was obviously the big one that had the most buzz, just from, I guess, where he was in the recruiting rankings. The fact that he was kind of the unspoken guy for so long, because it took him so long to hop into the portal. And then, obviously, anytime Tennessee beats out Kentucky for a basketball player, that's going to create a lot of buzz. And you're right, the Dalton comparisons aren't fair. I don't think he has maybe the juice that Dalton had, which is, who did. But the shooting, and obviously that was one of the big takeaways to come out of the closed door scrimmage against Davidson. It is him hitting a bunch of shots. So I think that, really, no doubt is a ceiling raiser for Tennessee and one of the key guys. But kind of flipping to the other side of it, what's the concern? What if Tennessee is not able to be in that SEC championship hunt, not be a team that makes a second weekend run in the NCAA tournament? Why do you think that'd be?
I don't think they have quite the same size and physicality that they've had in the past. Felix is, I think he'll be really good, but Felix is skinny. He's a rim runner. He's not a physical, enforcer at the rim. And then the 4 spot with Igor Milicic and D-Stone Dubar, both those guys still kind of fighting for roles, figuring out how they fit. D-Stone a little undersized, and then Milicic a more kind of skilled, kind of traditional European forward, right? He can play make a little bit. He can kind of ghost out of screens and hit catch and shoot threes, but he's not an overly physical dude, right? So in a league that has so much athleticism and physicality, I trust that a Barnes coach team is going to be tough and defend, but maybe not quite at the level that they have in the past. And if that's the case, the shot making better make up for it. And um, you would hope that it will, but a lot of it does rely on a guy who's playing against North Alabama and Eastern Kentucky last year,
Yeah.
and that worked for it worked for Dalton, but it hasn't worked for everyone. And if Chaz is a 12 point per game microwave scorer instead of 22 point per game SEC Player of the Year, then all of a sudden the calculus gets more muddied. And I think there's probably a middle ground where he'll land. But you know, if you're not going to be as good defensively, this team better be elite on the offensive end if they want to be again an SEC title and national contender. And I think they can be that, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, it's such an interesting blend, and we'll get a little bit more into the portal stuff, but for so long, it was like Rick so heavy on needing defensive guys in the portal and like that being a non-negotiable. And then he gets a taste of Dalton Connect, and it's like everybody besides Akpara that they go after is an offensive guy first. And they won't have quite the same physicality, which I mean they've just bullied teams. That's for so long. I mean you go back to the 22-23 team that makes the Sweet 16 without Zakai by beating Duke, and not a whole lot of talent when Zakai went down offensively on that team, and just from their sheer physicality. So that'll be curious to see how that blends. Maybe my biggest question for them, and I'll be curious to get your thoughts here, is who can step up and create offense besides Zakai Ziegler? We know he can do that, and they built a roster around him a lot, which I like. But and he's a different player now. He's a better player now. We saw 2 years ago on that team that even when he was still healthy, he was the guy that had to initiate offense. And a lot of times in the shot clock situations, as good as he is, he's 5'9". You can only do so much creating your own shot. How big of a concern do you feel like that is for maybe Tennessee's ceiling? And who would be some of the other guys on this team you'd point to that can step up and kind of create their own shot in those situations?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do think there's some hope that Chaz Lanier can be a little bit more than just a shooter. That there's some bag there offensively where he can go out and create his own. I do think you're going to try to mitigate a lot of it by running the floor, like shooting the verse 7-8 seconds of the shot clock, getting transition looks. I don't necessarily know that this team will be an elite half court offense. I do think that when you can put the amount of shooting on the floor that they can around Zakai and around a lob threat in Akpara, you take a lot of pressure off and you don't allow teams to kind of load up on the ball the way that a lot of teams have in the past with Tennessee teams. So I think that helps. Because look, if there's a world where you've got Chaz Lanier, Cam Carr, and D Stone Dubar on the floor together, 2 through 4. And yeah, that's smaller and that may not be great defensively, but I mean, those guys have a ton of shooting gravity. Like Cam Carr is an elite 3-point shooter. And so I think you're going to have to try to balance, maybe this is going to be the team that wants to pound it down, play the shot clock and go get a tough one. Dalton had that ability. That's a very special skill level that not a lot of guys have. But I'm not convinced that they'll need to be in those spots as much if they play as fast as they'd like to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's something that when I talked to a number of Tennessee coaches at their in-house media day, they brought up. They have to keep playing at a high tempo offensively, and I don't think people certainly don't think of Tennessee that way, and they're never going to be there because they drag teams into such slow possessions. But last year, I believe it was they ranked top 25 nationally in fastest or quickest offensive possessions. So I think they have to get back to that. And like you said, it's going to be a lot more four guard, or going to continue to be a lot of four guard, even without Josiah. They're banking on Milicic and Dubar to be able to play that role a little bit. And offensively, it should be even more exciting just because of how streaky Josiah was the shooter. Defensively, I think is the question there. But we've hit on all of them a little bit. But just the transfers, 4 guys they bring in, at least 3 are going to have pretty big roles. Good chance all 4 of them have pretty defined roles. What are your expectations for these guys? Which ones are you maybe the most excited about?
Yeah, look, I think I would be most optimistic probably about Chaz and Akpara, just because number one, I think their roles are a little bit more defined. Two, I think Akpara is someone that I always felt maybe had more juice in the tank than what he showed at Ohio State. He was someone that um, was sort of stuck in this center platoon. Played with a point guard in Bruce Thornton who was really good, but isn't necessarily like an elite passer. He's a scoring point guard, maybe not the perfect kind of lob threat, lob target type of point guard to play with. So I think with Sakai, the fit's a little bit better. I think asking Akpara to just run the floor, block shots, and dunk the ball is a pretty good recipe. I think he's gotten stronger. I think he's more comfortable in the system. I think he has an opportunity, right? Like I think when Tennessee recruited Felix Akpara, I think there was a belief like, oh, he just needs to be solid, right? Like here's the situation: we lost our two centers. We need someone who can come play 25 minutes and be productive, and that's what he was at Ohio State, right? He played 24 minutes a game. He averaged 7 and 7. He blocked 2 shots a game. Like you'd probably have signed for that, but I think there's more there, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him really take the next step in his game. Um, as for Igor and D Stone, guys who've been a part of winning programs, guys who've shot the ball, guys who are highly skilled, and both guys that started at the high major level, which I think is important. Like they just have the measurables and the physical tools to play at this level, which I think helps. I think both guys still settling in. Igor, I really loved his Charlotte film. Like there's some pretty impressive stuff on there, and I do think as the game kind of slows down for him, and he's able to kind of mitigate some of the athletic limitations compared to SEC opponents, I think he has a chance to be pretty darn good. So, and then D Stone again, not a lot of guys who are as productive as he was. Like 17 and 7 guys on good teams don't grow on trees, especially when they shoot 40% from 3 and 65% from 2. Like he's been a highly efficient scorer, and to have that guy potentially coming off your bench is a pretty good luxury.
Akpara, the floor just seems so high for him. Like it just feels like he is going to be incredibly solid for this team, and that was something I don't know. Everybody gets on campus in May and in June and start to do summer stuff. Like the first thing you heard was just how well him and Sakai play together, and it really does feel like they're a match made in heaven. And talking to him some, his family that he lived with in Chattanooga when he came and played at Hamilton Heights. They're big Tennessee fans, and that's what he said. He told me is like his dad was like, "Yeah, you and Sakai would be a perfect fit together." And Igor is the one I'm most intrigued by, just because I think he, as a 3-level scorer, brings so much. And having played at Virginia, having played at Charlotte, into incredibly low tempo, slow offenses, what he can look like at Tennessee. It just feels like there's some untapped stuff that we haven't seen there. And you're right. I think how we adjust to the speed and physicality will probably be the biggest question for him. But from what Tennessee wants to do offensively, and I mentioned it a minute ago with Josiah and some of his just inconsistencies offensively, it feels like Milicic is a perfect fit. So I'm super intrigued to see what he can do.
Look, I think he's the type of guy they don't have on their roster. He's 6'10", can move, can shoot, can handle the ball. Like that's a weapon. Now again, how does that settle? I don't know, but if you can get him right, as conference play approaches, that's a huge X factor for this team to elevate to new heights.
All right, let's move into a little bit of buy or sell with Tennessee basketball this season. Started off, all right, Tennessee's front court, unbelievable turnover, both from guys running out of eligibility and in the portal with Jonas and Tobe. Tennessee's 2024 5 front court, Okpara, Milicic, Dubar, Estrella, and Phillips being the backups behind Okpara, will be better than the front court last year with Adu Awaka, Estrella. This is the guys at the 5, and then Triple J at the 4.
I think I'll sell that slightly, partially because I do think Adu and Awaka were probably undervalued for kind of how good they were. Yes, they each had their own warts, which I think was probably frustrating as a Tennessee fan. If you could combine Tobe Awaka and Jonas Adu into one player, you'd have an NBA player. You'd have a really good NBA player. But I think there was maybe a stability and and the confidence you had in that group that maybe still improving with Felix. So I would sell it.
Yeah, that's the interesting one because, Jonas is there's so much variance there, and obviously was a really good player for him for 3 or 4 months, and the last thing everybody remembers is him playing poorly in the tournament and him getting benched for JP Estrella against Zach Edey and then him transferring. So I'm going to buy, going maybe skewing a little bit more towards that. To me, the question is offensively. Defensively, they're not going to be as good as Akpara is, and I think he's an upgrade over what they had at the 5 spot in Jonas. But Jonas was still really solid there. I think defensively is a big question for Estrella, especially with the foot injury he's had. Like I think that's a step back defensively compared to a walk end. And however, it irons itself out at the 4 with Milicic or D Stone. It's just not going to be as good as Josiah. But I like the offensive potential of what they could have at the 4. And I'll wager that while Akbar can do a lot less offensively than Jonas can, that the production won't be a massive dip. And then sticking with the offense, second one, Tennessee better than 35 in KenPom adjusted offensive efficiency. They finished 29 last year. They're right at that 35 spot in the preseason. To me, that feels like a fair number. Slight step back without Dalton. Can they avoid a catastrophic step back that keeps their ceiling at a relatively high rate?
I would say they're better than 35. Part of it's I feel like most of the year they were better than 28. Or like game to game, you felt like they were better offense than 28 nationally most of the year, and there were just a couple of stinkers that really kind of knocked down the number. Maybe there'll still be those stinkers, and you can live with that. But I think this is a really dynamic offensive team. So I'll buy into. I think they might be better than 28. Like I think this is a top 25 offense in my mind nationally, and maybe that's me undervaluing their defense or undervaluing Tennessee as a whole. If I think they're a top 25 offense, I kind of have them right in that kind of 11, 12 range. But yeah, like I'm a fan. I think this group has really high ceiling on that end of the floor.
Yeah, I mean you're bullish on them with that number. I mean honestly, like I think 30 to 35 is probably where I'd have them land. I think it'll be a slight step back. I just think the stinkers are going to be. You mentioned a couple of them tore them down last year. Like I just think they're going to be a little more common. Like I think you're going to see a lot of games where this looks like a top 15 offense, but without that go-to guy, and you're playing on the road, and you're not able to get out and transition. I wonder if you have more games that feel like Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, the 2022-2023 Tennessee team, where it just makes you want to pull your hair out at times. So I don't know. I guess I'm buying slightly, but that's to me that's the big question that will decide their ceiling. All right, last one, Zakai Ziegler, and I certainly have not scoured the web for every preseason All-American team, but on the ones I have seen has not been on them. So what do we say? Post in the season is Zakai Ziegler. We'll say there's 3 All-American teams. Is he an All-American point guard?
It's a good question. Let me pull up my own All-American list and see what I said. I honestly don't remember. He's right in that conversation. That's the thing. It's so hard. I actually think for years there's been this kind of narrative like point guard play in college basketball isn't very good. There's not enough good point guards, and I think this year is sort of a renaissance. You have Ziegler, you have Tamin Lipsey at Iowa State, you have Braden Smith at Purdue, you have Ryan Nembhard at Gonzaga. Like there's a pretty good group. Sears at Alabama, RJ if you count him as a point guard at Carolina. Like there's a really nice crop of them, which is great. I do think that makes it a little harder for Zakai to get on one of those teams. So I have him as a 3rd-team All-American. He was actually looks like he was my last pick. So that works well. So I guess I'll buy it because otherwise I'd be going against something I wrote literally like 2 days ago. But yeah, I mean, Kadari Richmond, Walter Clayton, who's going to play on the ball this year. Like there's like the competition's fierce. So I think if Tennessee's a top 10 team, Zakai Ziegler will be an All-American. If they're not, he probably won't be. That's probably the calculus as much as anything. Like, are they good enough for him to warrant that spot?
Yeah, we had like 3 straight years of the big. Was it the big preseason headline? It probably lined up perfect with NIL, where some of these guys that didn't have a lot of NBA high ceilings, it just made more sense for them to come back. But finally, have some of those guys cycled out. I think it depends on how you look at it. Like, are you going to do it, or do the people do it by the way it's done in the SEC, where it's kind of positionless for the most part? Like, can you put Mark Sears at the 2 because Mark Sears he's a point guard, but he's such a dominant scorer. And there's a number of guys in it. You mentioned RJ Davis, Caleb Love too. Like, if you're going to count those guys as their point guards and you can't put them at the 2, like, I think Zakai probably will get left out just because the scoring numbers aren't going to be as high. But I mean, besides Braden Smith, like, I think from a pure passing first point guard assist numbers, Zakai is going to be up there with about anybody in the country. And I think he's a guy that kind of got probably overlooked some last year because he was so, now to be, I love Zakai, but he was so bad the first month of the season when he was coming back from the ACL.
For
And that
sure.
really skewered his stats pretty poorly from the season. But when you got to SEC play, I think he shot 38% from 3, like right at 7 assists a game, 13, 14 points. He was an elite player in SEC play last year. Good in the tournament too. Maybe didn't shoot the ball great. Playing 40 minutes a game probably didn't help him there. But I'm going to buy it as well, with the caveat of some of these guys that are more scoring dominant point guards, if they're not allowed to be put at the 2 spot, he's probably going to get left out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that front.
All right, to wrap it up, let's move it over to the SEC portion. And let's actually, Tennessee picked here 3rd. Before we talk about where we think Tennessee lands, I couldn't help, and maybe it was more directed at the Big Ten than the SEC, but Dan Hurley's quote on Wednesday at Big East Media Days about all these conferences talking about being the best in the country and not having any national championships. I couldn't help but think about the SEC. Rick Barnes will tell you every time you talk to him it's the best conference in the country, and I guess I roll my eyes at it a little bit less now that Alabama's got a Final Four. I mean, there was a Final Four drought that was pretty long before last season, but the depth has been elite. I think there's 9 teams in the preseason AP poll. You see a number of bracketology projections with double-digit teams making the tournament. Do you buy the SEC being the best conference? Do you think it's going to be as deep as a lot of the analytics sites and really a lot of people nationally are saying?
I think the depth is insane. Like I don't think there's a bad basketball team in this conference, and part of that's just like the pure force of NIL, if you will. Like there's no there's no cheap rosters in this league, which means there's no terrible rosters. Even in the Big 12, which I think is clearly the best conference of college basketball. Colorado, Utah, Oklahoma State were pretty far behind NIL wise, and both needed to replace a ton. So they wound up with very mediocre looking rosters that I think all would be last place in the SEC this year. But the Big 12 also has a top tier that I don't think the SEC can quite match. Houston, Kansas, Iowa State, Arizona, Baylor, even Texas Tech. I think will be in that mix. Cincinnati, like the top 8 of that league is unbelievable. The top 8 of the SEC is also darn good. Obviously, we've seen that all those teams ranked. So, look, I think the way I would describe it right now, the Big 12 is the best conference in the country because it has the highest top end talent throughout the league. The Big East deserves respect because they produce national champions, but top to bottom, it's not there compared to the Big 12 and the SEC. And the SEC probably has the best rosters in college basketball, largely because I think they have the most money. I mean, that's not. I think part of it's just there's an infrastructure in place with football NIL that they had to be out of the game a little bit. It's helped them. Part of it's just rich athletic departments, people used to spending money, yada yada yada. But like, yeah, I mean the fact that like I'm on like the SEC KenPom preseason page and Georgia's picked 15th, and Georgia has a lottery pick in Asa Newell. They have some high level transfers. Their front court's loaded. Like if that, they're 67th in preseason KenPom and 15th in the SEC. Like best of luck, right? That's a quad 1 game when you're playing the second to last team in the league. And even Vandy. I mean, Vandy's picked last by KenPom. Vandy's got some real players. So I understand why SEC coaches are banging the drum. I don't think they quite deserve the number 1 nod yet, but it's a really good conference. It's night and day from where it was a decade ago, and I do think it's a matter of time before someone really breaks through and cuts down the nets because these teams are really really talented and really really well coached at the top.
Yeah, Bart Torvik has Vanderbilt 16th in the SEC, 75th nationally. Like, just the fact that every team in the league could be top 75 is pretty insane. And kind of to the same regard, like I think this is a good chance we'll have SEC champion. We'll have the worst conference record in a while. Like I think the one that comes to mind was Tennessee and Auburn split in 18 at 13-5. Like I think it could be 12-6 this year. Ken Palm has Tennessee going 11-7. Like it's crazy, but that like would very well keep them right in the hunt to win the league title.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
I mean,
on
yeah, I
that
was going to say
same
12-6, 13-5. I think probably wins it, but 12 and
yeah.
6 will be in the mix.
On that same note, Tennessee third, picked by the media. That's where I had them as well, behind Alabama and Auburn. Where do you think Tennessee stacks up? Alabama, obviously the popular pick preseason for good reason. Where do you see Tennessee finishing?
Yeah, I have them third behind Alabama and Auburn. Not reinventing the wheel with that. I think Auburn. It's funny. I think they're getting like the rankings love, but I think they're sort of like overlooked in terms of like two top tier national contenders. Their guard play pretty much can't be worse than they were last year. They still have maybe the best big in the country in Broom. They were top 10 offense, top 10 defense, number one effective field goal percentage defense, top rim defense last year. Like they were a monster analytically, and again, I think the worst case for them is that their guards are just as bad as they were last year. So I think the Jalen Williams departure is probably more important to me than the guards, and so be interesting to watch them. But I think Tennessee is right in that conversation, and I think this is absolutely a team that can get to a second weekend and maybe even a Final Four if things break right.
All right, going on that same thought, kind of. Actually, let's go here first, because you're right. Most people, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, pretty consensus 1 through 3. A lot more deviation behind Tennessee. What would you say? Maybe 4 or 5. Who would be your favorite picks to be in kind of emerging in that next group that feels really really tight?
Yeah, I have Florida 4, Arkansas 5, Kentucky 6, Ole Miss 7, A&M 8, and Texas 9. That's my those teams are all like top 30 teams in my preseason rankings, which I'll drop on Monday. Um, yeah, it's again that tier is I think Florida. I think I have like 18th or 19th nationally, and Texas like 28th. So we're talking like incredibly thin margins between all those teams, and a lot of it could be decided by an injury here, an injury there. That like Arkansas really only has 9 guys. There's been some potential buzz about guys being banged up. Like wouldn't take much for them to drop a game or two, and all of a sudden you'll be in that spot, or vice versa with a lot of these other teams. So I think if you were making tiers, to me, tier 1 would be Alabama and Auburn, and maybe Tennessee. Tennessee almost would be like in a tier of its own, and between those two and above that, next glut. And then there's this a wide group of teams that won't be separated by much.
So you're making me feel good here because I voted on the SEC preseason, and obviously you pay attention to what goes on in the league, but so Tennessee centric at times, and so much changes. I had Florida at 4, and I think I had A&M at 9, and A&M's been so high on all this stuff that felt like maybe I was very much disrespecting them, but I don't know. I also went with Josh Hubbard as my first team over Wade Taylor, which I mean, they're kind of they're both volume shooter, volume scorer guys. So I'm all aboard the Josh Hubbard hype train. All right,
I'm a big fan of that take, by the way.
Let's go.
That's
Yeah,
really good.
it's Josh Hubbard. Few players more fun in the SEC to watch than him, and was glad he stuck at State. Like, give me some entertainment when it comes to Mississippi State because good team. Christian's done a good job. They got a lot of early Tennessee Rick Barnes besides Hubbard with the physicality and lack of offense.
Yeah, no question.
All right, last thing. Tennessee can repeat as SEC champions, and I guess this goes in the same thing, being a good enough team to win or to make it to the Final Four. If what has to click for them to have that type of ceiling?
Man, I mean, it feels very vague. It feels very like 2024 to be like the transfers have to hit, which is like, yeah, everybody's transfers have to hit. But yeah, like I think especially Chaz Lanier and Felix Akpara have to be the guys that they recruited, right? If those guys live up to the expectations, If those guys are as good as advertised, then Tennessee has all the makings of a group that can be just as good as they were last year. That can be just as good as any team in the SEC. That can compete for a national championship. Again, will that happen? Who knows, right? That's the beauty of this thing right now. There's a lot more kind of uncertainty team to team. How do you mesh? I mean, look, Tennessee feels like a more known quantity because they at least have a proven coach and a point guard, but still potentially 3 or 4 new starters and new faces. It's just kind of the way of the world right now. So I would consider myself a cautious buyer of stock in the Vols, and I think I'm excited to see them. Obviously, good. It's always good to get eyes on the guys. And I mean, last year, part of the Dalton thing, you kind of teased it at the top, was like, I don't know. Everybody says how good he is, in practice in the fall, and you listen, but you always want to see it, and then you watch the film and you're like, oh yeah, like that guy, like that looks different now. And guys, like some guys just look different, and Dalton looked different. So excited to turn on the tape and see who looks different in the SEC this year. But I think this group has the makings of being pretty darn good.
Kevin Sweeney, appreciate you joining us. Sports Illustrated, Phil to 68 on guest on some of their podcasts and late night shows. Kevin, busy time for you. Where can people check out your work and what all you have coming out here before the season?
Yeah, SI.com. We're working on we have all our conference previews up, preseason All-Americans, like that. And we'll have our 1 through 364 national rankings of every team in the country dropping on Monday. So that's exciting. Otherwise, gearing up for the year. Could be out on the road a bunch. Check me out. Feel the 68 After Dark. Always a fun time with a great group of guys. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kevin, appreciate you joining us. Appreciate everybody listening. No podcast this Saturday night with Tennessee football off, but we will be back next week. We will also have our Tennessee basketball preview with Rick and myself, probably go a full hour. Tennessee, Indiana exhibition game on Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Check that out. We'll talk a lot about that and should get a good early feel for the team. So appreciate everybody joining us, and we'll see you back for the next one.